Think about the sheer invisible magic of what happens when you buy a coffee today, or when a massive corporation wires millions of dollars across the globe. You tap a piece of plastic against a glass terminal, or your phone scans a code. In a fraction of a second, a silent signal beams through the air, bouncing off satellites and racing through deep-sea cables. Halfway across the world, an invisible ledger on a distant server quietly updates. You don't feel the weight of the money. You don't hire armed mercenaries to protect the radio waves carrying your transaction. Wealth, in the modern world, is beautifully frictionless. It is nothing more than pure information. But to understand how we achieve this, to understand the true origin of your bank account, your credit card, and the invisible engine of the entire global economy, we have to wipe that digital network away. We have to go back to a time when money was heavy and trust was practically non-existent. For centuries, from the massive grain ships feeding ancient Rome to the armored caravans of the Templar knights carving routes through the desert, wealth was a physical, exhausting burden. Imagine the suffocating reality of global trade in the year 1430. Feel the freezing, driving rain on a wooden dock in northern Europe. Listen to the frantic, overlapping shouts of desperate dock workers. Hear the slipping of leather boots in deep, freezing mud, the splintering of wet wood, and the terrifying, dull thud of a reinforced iron chest being dropped onto the deck of a swaying galleon. That chest is filled with gold and silver coins, and in that era, that was the absolute only way to move wealth. If you were a merchant wanting to buy English wool or foreign spices, you couldn't just send a message. You had to physically load your life's fortune onto a cart or a ship. You had to drag it across bandit-filled dirt roads or pirate-infested oceans. The logistics of buying and selling were a nightmare of physical security. Every time you moved money, you risked losing everything you had ever built to the bottom of the sea or the blade of a thief. And the chaos wasn't just outside on the dangerous trade routes, it was rotting businesses from the inside too. A merchant's record-keeping was terrifyingly primitive. It was essentially a singular running diary of what happened that day. A ledger might just say, sold 10 crates of silk, paid the blacksmith 3 coins. Because it was just a simple list, it was a breeding ground for fraud. If a clerk pocketed a handful of gold, or if a transaction simply wasn't written down, it vanished from history. There was no way to prove a mistake, no mathematical way to audit a business, and no way to catch a thief. The entire global economy was suffocating under its own physical weight and a crippling, systemic lack of trust. But then, the atmosphere shifts. Leave the freezing, chaotic, mud-soaked docks behind. Step out of the shouting wind and into the absolute, breathless silence of a subterranean vault in Florence, Italy. Here, the roaring ocean is replaced by the dry, ancient scent of leather and aged parchment. The shouting of mercenaries is replaced by the rhythmic, deliberate scratch of a single feather quill. Imagine the heavy shadows of the stone walls, pushed back only by the warm, flickering glow of a solitary candle. In this quiet room, microscopic dust motes drift lazily through a narrow beam of sunlight. Outside a high iron-grated window, a single olive leaf sways gently in the breeze, entirely undisturbed by the violent chaos of the outside world. At the center of a heavy oak desk sits a massive, leather-bound book, the Medici Ledger. The Medici family didn't invent wealth, and they didn't invent mathematics. But in these quiet, candlelit rooms, they popularized a system that acted like a superpower, double-entry bookkeeping, and it was about to sever the heavy chains of physical money forever. We aren't going to get bogged down in the textbook math of debits and credits. You just need to understand the profound concept of a perfect mirror. Before the Medici, money was tracked in that single, flawed list. But the Medici demanded that every single movement of wealth be written down twice, in 2 separate, opposing columns. If something went out of the business, something of the exact same value had to come in. Action, and equal, inescapable reaction. At the end of the day, when the streets of Florence grew quiet, the master accountant would tally up both sides of the massive book, and they had to balance, perfectly, to absolute zero. This wasn't just a neat way to organize numbers, it was a trap for liars. It was a flawless, self-verifying mechanism of truth. If the 2 sides of that ledger were off by even a single fractional silver coin, the system immediately raised an alarm. Suddenly, wealth couldn't just vanish into the shadows. To steal from the Medici, you would have to forge multiple entries across multiple books, perfectly balancing your lie against the truth without anyone noticing. The math itself became the ultimate security guard. Because this mathematics was so pure, it generated something the world had never seen on a global scale. Unbreakable, systemic trust. The books always told the truth. And that trust led to the defining climax of the financial revolution. Picture an exhausted merchant walking into the Medici Bank in Florence. He is hauling that same heavy, iron-bound chest of gold we saw on the docks. He is paranoid, sleep-deprived, and weighed down by the physical reality of his money. He hands the gold over to the banker. The banker doesn't give him back a different chest. He simply dips his quill into a well of dark ink. The candlelight catches the wet ink as he scratches a few numbers into the giant ledger, formally recording that the bank now holds the gold. Then, the banker reaches for a small blank piece of parchment. He writes a few lines, seals it with red wax, and hands the merchant this single, folded piece of paper. A letter of credit. Watch that merchant walk out of the heavy wooden doors. His iron chest is gone. His armed mercenaries are dismissed. He steps out into the bright Italian sun with nothing but a piece of paper tucked securely inside his coat. He is completely unburdened. He can now travel light and sleep soundly. He can ride all the way across the Alps to a Medici branch in London, hand them that piece of paper, and the London banker, checking his own perfectly balanced ledger, will hand him the equivalent value in local English currency. The merchant didn't move a single ounce of gold. The gold stayed safe in the quiet, dust-filled vault back in Florence. Only the information moved. This is the exact moment in human history when wealth fundamentally transformed. It stopped being a heavy, dangerous metal you had to drag across the earth, and it became data. The Medici had effectively invented the first wire transfer, using nothing but a feather quill, a candlelit room, and perfectly balanced mathematics. By trapping the truth in ink, the Medici amassed unprecedented power. Because they could move money with a stroke of a pen rather than a fleet of ships, they funded armies, influenced popes, and bankrolled the very artists and architects who physically built the Renaissance. The seamless, invisible digital economy you live in today does not exist without this monumental shift. Our humming server farms and deep-sea cables pulsing with digital currency are just modern, electrified versions of that quiet room in Florence. We traded the feather quill for silicon microchips and the heavy parchment for digital hard drives, but the core mechanism is exactly the same. We are still just trusting the ledger. So the next time you look at your bank balance on a glowing screen, take a moment to remember the heavy iron chests sinking in the freezing mud. Remember the grueling physical weight of the ancient world. And remember the quiet, dimly lit vault where a few careful strokes of ink severed our wealth from the physical world, creating the invisible, data-driven empire we all live in today.